Details revealed in court show that when homicide detectives arrived, they located clothing in the bathroom that was used by the suspect, soaked in blood. Lawyers with the case say the night prior to the murder, Shalimar found a knife that Green had been sleeping with and confronted him about why he had it. Additionally, prosecutors say Green admitted to, quote, raping the 11-year-old post-mortem, end quote. Green is set to appear again in court on June 5th.
There is a particular kind of silence that settles over a neighborhood when something unspeakable has happened. Not the peaceful quiet of an ordinary evening, but the heavy, suffocating kind. The kind where people stand on their porches and don't speak, where children are pulled inside without explanation, where the flicker of police lights turns familiar streets into something out of a nightmare. That silence fell over Chatsworth Way on the east side of Columbus, Ohio, on the evening of May 27, 2026. And by the time it lifted, two people were gone, a mother and her 11-year-old daughter, and the man responsible had been living in the same house with them all along. To understand how this happened, truly understand it, you cannot start on the night of the murders. You have to go back to a relationship that had been quietly unraveling for years, back to warning signs that were documented, reported, and ultimately ignored, back to a system that had Derek Green in its grasp more than once and let him go. Because what happened on Chatsworth Way did not begin with a gunshot or a knife. It began with a pattern. A long, documented, terrifying pattern that Shalimar Green had been living inside of and trying to escape from for years. Shalimar Green was 33 years old. By all accounts, she was a devoted mother, a woman who built her world around her daughter, Alavia Chandler. Alavia was 11. She had just graduated from 6th grade at Groveport-Madison Local School District, the kind of milestone that marks the beginning of something, the summer before middle school, before teenage years, before all the life that was supposed to come. Teachers remembered her. Classmates loved her. She was, by every measure, a child on the edge of becoming. She never got the chance. Derek Green was 35 years old and had been married to Shalimar for some time. But behind closed doors, those who knew the family understood that this was not a peaceful home. Shalimar had been involved in what police would later describe as an ongoing domestic dispute with her husband, one that had escalated steadily and dangerously over the years. And by the spring of 2026, she had made a decision that many domestic violence experts will tell you is the most dangerous moment in any abusive relationship. She had decided to leave. Court records would later confirm it plainly. Shalimar and Derek were in the process of ending their marriage. She was done, and Derek Green was not. Before we go any further, you need to know something about this man's history because it is central to everything that follows. In January of 2021, Derek Green was named as a suspect in the death of a 31-year-old man named Kenneth Palmer. According to investigators, the two got into an argument at a New Year's Eve party and Green shot him. Palmer died from his injuries. A murder charge was filed. And then, in a turn that would prove devastating in hindsight, a grand jury returned what is known as a no bill, meaning they found insufficient evidence to formally indict him. The case collapsed. Green walked free. 2 years later, in 2023, it was Shalimar herself who was the victim. Green was charged in Whitehall with strangulation and domestic violence. Court documents stated plainly that he had knowingly caused or attempted to cause physical harm to Shalimar by strangulation, and that he had slapped her in the face before wrapping his hands around her throat. The prosecutor's office reviewed the case. Once again, a grand jury declined to indict. Once again, Green walked. And Shalimar was left alone with a man who had now been accused of killing once and choking her, with no legal consequence to show for either. By 2025, police records show that officers had been called to their home on multiple occasions in connection with domestic violence. The calls were logged, the visits were made, but Shalimar and Alavia were still in that house, and Derek Green was still in it with them. The Tuesday before the murders, May 26, 2026, Something happened that, in retrospect, reads as a final, desperate warning sign. Shalimar walked into the room and found her husband asleep on the couch. That alone might have seemed ordinary, except that Derek Green was not simply sleeping. He was sleeping with a knife in his hand. Shalimar took the knife away from him. Then she did what any frightened spouse might do: she confronted him. She asked him why he was carrying a knife to bed. We do not know exactly what he said in response. What we do know is what happened less than 24 hours later. On the evening of Wednesday, May 27th, relatives of Shalimar and Alavaya grew concerned. Calls were made. No one answered. The worry deepened. A relative drove to the house on Chatsworth Way and went inside. What they found there is something that no person should ever have to witness, and something that would send shockwaves through an entire community before the night was over. Shalimar Green and her 11-year-old daughter Alavaya Chandler were dead, both of them, inside their own home. The relative called for help, and at approximately 7:15 in the evening, officers from the Columbus Division of Police arrived at the scene. Medics responded. The two were pronounced dead, and Derek Green, the husband, the man who had been sleeping with a knife the night before, the man who had twice evaded serious criminal charges, was nowhere to be found. His red 2012 Dodge Challenger sat in the driveway, but a white 2011 Ford Explorer registered to the household was gone. Derek Green had run. The investigation had just begun, and what detectives would find inside that house would be among the most disturbing evidence ever collected in a Columbus domestic homicide case. Every crime scene tells a story, not always in the way detectives hope, not always cleanly or in perfect sequence, but the evidence is always there, embedded in the details that most people would never think to notice. The spent cartridges on the floor, the angle of a wound, a kitchen knife with blood dried into the handle, these things do not lie. And what investigators found inside the home at Chatsworth Way on the night of May 27, 2026, told a story that was as brutal as it was methodical. Shalimar Green and Alavaya Chandler had not died from one cause. They had been attacked with both a gun and a knife. Court documents confirmed that both victims sustained multiple gunshot wounds and multiple stab wounds. The violence was extreme, far beyond what was needed to cause death. Investigators who have worked domestic homicide cases for years will tell you that this kind of overkill almost always points to someone who knew the victims intimately. Someone for whom the act carried a personal, devastating weight. This was not a robbery. This was not a stranger. This was someone who lived in that house. Detectives moved through the rooms carefully. What they found built a case piece by piece. Spent bullet cartridges were recovered from inside the home. A large kitchen knife, the kind found in any family's kitchen, was recovered, and it had blood on it. Blood-soaked clothing was found inside the house as well. But it was what the investigators found outside that helped them move quickly. Parked in the driveway was Derek Green's red Dodge Challenger. And when detectives looked inside through the window, they saw something that would prove to be a critical piece of evidence: ammunition. Sitting in plain view in the front passenger seat was .380 caliber ammunition, and when forensic analysts matched it to the spent cartridges recovered from inside the home, the ballistic story clicked into place. The rounds fired in that house matched the rounds sitting in Derek Green's car. This was his weapon. This was his work. By this point, the Columbus Division of Police had a suspect and they had evidence. What they did not have was the man himself. Green had fled the residence before officers arrived. An entire deployment of resources was activated: patrol units, a police helicopter in the air, K-9 tracking units on the ground. Derek Green had a head start, but he did not have far enough to go. SWAT officers located him and took him into custody later that Wednesday night without incident. He offered no resistance. The man who had just allegedly committed one of the most violent domestic homicides in recent Columbus history surrendered quietly in the dark. He was booked into the Franklin County Jail. He was charged with 2 counts of murder. And as the investigation continued in the hours and days that followed, What emerged from the case documents would leave even seasoned law enforcement officers shaken. According to reports, Green admitted to sexually assaulting Alavia post-mortem, the 11-year-old child, after killing her. The detail is almost impossible to process in its horror. An 11-year-old girl who had just graduated 6th grade, a child who trusted the adults in her home to protect her. What was done to her in that house on Chatsworth Way goes beyond the already unthinkable act of murder. It represents a level of depravity that no single word in the English language adequately captures. As the criminal case against Green took shape, something else began to happen simultaneously, something that often occurs in high-profile domestic homicide cases, and that cuts just as deep as the crime itself. People began to ask questions, not just about what Derek Green did, but about what the system had failed to do, because this was not a man who had appeared out of nowhere. This was a man with a documented, years-long history of violence that had been seen, recorded, reviewed, and repeatedly failed to result in consequences that could have changed the outcome on Chatsworth Way. The Franklin County Prosecutor's Office addressed it directly. In a public statement, they acknowledged that in 2023 their office had reviewed a case involving Derek Green, the strangulation and domestic violence charges involving Shalimar herself, and that the case had been dismissed due to insufficient evidence. Prosecutors are bound by evidentiary standards. They cannot indict without enough to bring to trial. And yet the effect of that dismissal, in the context of everything that followed, is something the community of Columbus would wrestle with openly in the days after the murders. First Assistant Police Chief LaShanna Potts stood before cameras and said words that captured the grief and the fury of an entire city. No child should ever have to lose their lives at the hands of someone that they trusted. She pledged accountability. She spoke of a department focused on making sure that what happened next in the courtroom reflected the full weight of what had been taken from Shalimar and Alavia. Back on Chatsworth Way, the neighborhood was trying to breathe. Chalk messages began appearing on the sidewalk in front of the house, written by children, drawn by small hands, covering the concrete in color and love and grief. Nearly 100 people came out for a candle-lit vigil and balloon release. Teachers from Alavia's elementary school and her new middle school both attended.
New
Standing
details
among
revealed
students
in
who had only
court
just said
show that
goodbye
when
to her at
homicide detectives
graduation,
arrived,
who now
they
had to say
located
goodbye
clothing
to her
in the
forever.
bathroom that was used by
One
the
neighbor,
suspect,
shaken
soaked
by
in
how
blood.
many children lived
Lawyers
on
with
that
the
block
case
and
say
had
the night
witnessed
prior to the
aftermath,
murder,
announced
Shalimar
she
found
would
a
host
knife that
mental
Green
health
had been
check-ins at the
sleeping with
nearby park,
and confronted
a
him
place
about
for
why he
kids to
had it.
talk, to
Additionally,
feel
prosecutors
safe,
say
to
Green
begin to
admitted
understand
to,
something that
quote,
no adult
raping the
had the words
11-year-old
to fully
post-mortem,
explain.
end quote. Green
Groveport
is set to
Madison
appear
local
again in
schools
court on June
activated their
5th.
social workers.
In Columbus, Amy
Resources
Steigerwald,
were made
10 TV
available.
News.
The district moved to support not only Alavia's surviving family, but any student who needed help processing what had happened to their classmate. And on Friday morning, May 30th, Derek Green appeared in court for the first time. A judge looked at the charges, looked at the history, and set his bond at $5 million. He was not going anywhere. But the legal process was only just beginning. And the most significant chapter of this story, the one that would determine whether justice would finally be served for a man who had slipped through the cracks of the system twice before, was still ahead. There is a specific kind of grief that follows a preventable death. It is different from the grief that comes with accident or illness. It carries with it a weight that ordinary mourning does not, a bitter, relentless undercurrent of what if. What if the system had worked differently in 2021? What if the grand jury had returned an indictment in 2023? What if the domestic violence calls in 2025 had triggered a different response? What if Shalimar Green had received the protection she deserved the first time she reported what was happening behind closed doors? These are not questions with easy answers, but in the aftermath of what happened on Chatsworth Way, they are questions that Columbus, and the wider country watching this case, could not stop asking. Derek Green sat in the Franklin County Jail with a $5 million bond and 2 counts of murder over his head. His next court date was set for June 5, 2026. The legal machinery had been set in motion, and this time there was evidence. This time there were shell casings, a bloody knife, matching ammunition, blood-soaked clothing, and Green's own admissions. This time, the case was not going to quietly disappear into a grand jury room and come out the other side with a no bill. This time, the weight of what had been done to Shalimar, to Alavaya, to a community sat on the record in a way that could not be minimized. But even as the criminal case moved forward, the story of how the system had interacted with Derek Green over the years remained a central and painful conversation. In 2021, a 31-year-old man named Kenneth Palmer was allegedly shot and killed by Green at a New Year's Eve gathering. An affidavit described the argument, the shooting, the death. And then a grand jury, the same mechanism designed to be a filter between accusation and trial, looked at the evidence and said it was not enough. Green was free. Kenneth Palmer's family had to live with that, and so, eventually, did Shalimar. In 2023, Shalimar Green herself had done what domestic violence advocates urge every survivor to do. She reported him. She went to the authorities and told them that Derek Green had put his hands around her throat. She told them he had slapped her. She had physical evidence of the encounter.
Stabbed and
Charges
fatally
were filed.
shot 33-year-old
once
Shalimar
again, the
Green
grand
and her
jury
daughter,
process came to a
11-year-old
halt
Olivia
before it ever
Chandler.
became a trial.
New details revealed in court show when
Prosecutor's
homicide
office,
detectives
in a statement
arrived,
they
they
released after the
located
murders,
clothing in the
was
bathroom
careful in
that
how
was
they
used by the
described what had
suspect,
happened,
soaked in
bound by
blood,
the
and
realities
lawyers
of
with the case
evidentiary
say the night
standards,
prior to the murder,
bound by the
Shalimar
limits of what
found
a
a
grand
knife that
jury was
Green
asked
had
to
been
weigh.
sleeping with
But
and
no
confronted
statement
him
could
about
erase
why
the
he
fact
had
that
it.
Shalimar had asked
Additionally,
for help,
prosecutors
and the
say
system
Green
had not been able
admitted
to
to,
hold Derek
quote,
Green accountable.
raping the 11-year-old
There are people
post-mortem,
who knew
end quote.
Shalimar Green
Green
who've
is
had to
set to
sit with
appear
that
in court
knowledge
on
since May
June 5th.
27th.
Stabbed
Who have had
and
to look at the
fatally shot
timeline,
33-year-old
the
Shalimar Green
2021 murder
and her daughter,
charge, the
11-year-old
2023
Olivia Chandler.
strangulation,
New
the
details revealed in
2025
court show
domestic
when
violence
homicide
calls,
detectives
the
arrived,
knife
they
on the couch
located
on May
clothing in the
26th,
bathroom
and
that was used
understand
by
that
the
each of
suspect,
those moments
soaked
was a
in
point
blood,
at which the
and
story
lawyers with
could
the
have
case
ended
say the
differently.
night prior to the murder,
Each one was a
Shalimar
door
found a
that could have
knife that
opened
Green
onto a
had been
different future
sleeping with
for a
and confronted him
33-year-old
about why
woman
he had
and
it.
her
Additionally,
11-year-old
prosecutors
daughter.
say Green
Because
admitted
here is
to,
what those who
quote,
study domestic
raping the
violence will
11-year-old
tell you,
post-mortem, end
consistently
quote.
and without
Green is
hesitation.
set to appear
The
in
most
court on
dangerous
June
time for
5th.
a woman in an abusive relationship
If
is
news
when
not
she
your
decides
Mary
to
vote
leave.
has in here.
The moment a
Woke
victim
the
signals that the
room so
relationship is
boring
over,
developing it here.
the risk of
Woke
lethal
wish
violence
did
spikes
in that
dramatically.
near guess or his our
Shalimar
feeling
Green
shit.
knew this,
Said I
perhaps
he
in
was a minute
instinctual
enough
way
nick.
that people
Then
who
if
live
you snip
inside
that near
dangerous
at the end
situations
and I
come
from
to
the
know
lash.
things.
Heard room of the
She had
tree out
taken the
behind
knife
this
away from
see
him
get the
the
tree
night
on it.
before.
It all nick was
She had
got
confronted
us
him.
out so
She
you
was
what
ending the
mirth had been
marriage.
it will
She was
did it
trying to
will it
find a way
there
out.
was the gas the
And on
some
the
on
evening
was
of May
stroke his liver's
27th,
life
the
did doing
man she was trying to
Romesh
leave
they
made
will
sure she
boring
never
the
reached
vella
him.
or near from the
Alavaya
lash
Chandler
lawyer
was
theater
11
thought
years
she
old.
would if night
She
by
had done nothing except exist in a house where a dangerous man also lived. She had graduated 6th grade just days before. She had her whole life coiled up inside her, waiting to unfold. She should have been spending her summer the way 11-year-olds spend their summers, outside, with friends, complaining about the heat, staying up too late. Instead, she became the youngest victim in a case that exposed every failure in a chain of systems that were supposed to protect people exactly like her. The chalk on the sidewalk, the balloons released into a Columbus evening sky, nearly 100 people standing in the fading light, teachers and children and neighbors who had no words but came anyway, because coming was all they had. These are the moments that happen after the crime scenes are processed and the suspects are booked and the press releases are written. The community of Independence Village on the east side of Columbus gathered together because two of their own had been taken from them in the most violent and permanent way imaginable. And because the children who lived on that block needed to see that the adults around them had not given up on the idea that love mattered, even when evil had visited their street. As of June 2026, Derek Green remains in custody. His court date of June 5th sits on the calendar, the beginning of what will almost certainly be a long legal process. He faces 2 counts of murder. The additional allegations related to what was done to Alavaya after her death add yet another layer of charge and horror to a case that is already devastating in its scope. Prosecutors now have physical evidence, documented history, and admissions. The legal path ahead is not the same one that let this man walk free in 2021 and again in 2023. But no conviction, no matter how just, brings back a 33-year-old mother who is trying to start over. No verdict gives back the summer to an 11-year-old girl who had just finished 6th grade and had no idea that her last days of school were also her last days on Earth. Justice, in cases like this, is never complete. It is only the closest thing to accountability that the living can offer the dead. What happened in that house on Chatsworth Way is a story about many things at once. It is a story about domestic violence and how it escalates, slowly and then all at once. It is a story about a system with gaps that real people fall through at catastrophic cost. It is a story about a man who was given chance after chance to face consequences and never did, until it was too late for 2 people who deserved better. And it is a story about a community that refused to let Shalimar Green and Alavaya Chandler simply become a statistic. Their names deserve to be remembered, not just in headlines, not just in court documents, but in the way that names of people who mattered are meant to be remembered with full knowledge of who they were, what they meant to the people around them, and what the world lost when they were taken. Shalimar Green, 33 years old, mother. Alavaya Chandler, 11 years old, daughter. Gone from Chatsworth Way, but not forgotten.